Thank you for joining For Our Special Kids, where we openly and honestly discuss the magic and the mess of raising a child with special needs. We are thrilled to have you here and hope this time provides you with some wonder and wisdom. I'm your host, Jennifer Lansing. Let's get started. This week, I had the opportunity to speak with Eli Harwood. Many of you know her as the attachment nerd on Insta, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. She posts lots of amazing videos that are extremely meaningful and appropriate for our times about how to really create better relationships with our children. If you haven't checked her out, please go do that and watch some of her videos. In our discussion, we look at her definition of trauma and how to work through it on a variety of different ways and different levels. She believes very much in creating a secure attachment with our children and gives us tips on how to attune with them. Eli also gives us parents or caregivers with children with special needs some much needed love and understanding. She said at one point that we are on a heroic journey and encourages us to find little microdoses of time for ourselves. I really took that to heart. Throughout our chat, her office building's fire alarm is going off, and she beautifully works that into our discussion. So if you hear the beeping every now and again, know that there is a really amazing metaphor coming for you. I look forward to having Eli back for a live discussion with all of us. So if you have questions for her or topics that you'd like us to look into, please send them over to me at jen@forourspecialkids.com. As always, I hope you enjoy and let me know what you think. Well, today I am with Eli Harwood, who is a licensed therapist, author, and educator who has more than 16 years of experience helping people process their early traumas and develop secure attachment relationships with their children and partners. Eli is trained in EMDR and TBRI and the attachment resource tool, The Strange Situation. She is a mother of 3 beautiful children and once, love this, won a set of globes as a contestant on The Price is Right. I love that part.
We should add that I lost. I didn't win the car. I only won the set of globes. So that was a bit unfortunate.
I'm really sorry.
Try to look on the bright side.
Yeah. One of my best friends got all the way to the final, like whatever that's called.
The final Showcase Showdown.
Yeah, the Showcase Showdown. Thank you very much. And she didn't win that, but I was pretty impressed she got that far. I mean, she had to spin the wheel. You spun the wheel. Is it heavy?
Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
Yeah, it looks heavy.
Felt like I thought it would feel. Like how I imagined the
yes,
vibe.
The effort. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember the number you got?
I think I got 65 cents. So not so good.
Not so
I
good.
definitely did not move on to the Showcase. Okay. I just went home with my globes.
You just went home with your globes. All right. Well, let's back up for 1 second. Welcome. So glad you're here. Will you tell me what EMDR and TBRI are?
Yes. Okay. So EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. It is a somatic form of therapy. Essentially, what happens in EMDR is you're targeting a trauma that has like a high intensity feeling in your body. So it's something that happened in the past, but your body says it sure feels like it's happening in the present. And EMDR is helping you to reprocess the event using some stimulation. It basically just helps keep parts of your brain active at the same time so that that disturbance level can go down and that intensity in your body starts to kind of shift out of your body and you feel like the thing that happened in the past instead of the present.
Wonderful. And
TBRI, Trust-Based Relationship Intervention, is a protocol for helping children who have trauma. And it was developed by Karen Purvis at TCU. And essentially, it is a way to help children develop that doesn't involve using punishment or behavior modification, but uses the relationship between the caregiver and the child to help heal attachment wounds, which in turn helps to create synchronous behavior, social skills, self-regulation skills, all of that. It is amazing. The research behind it is incredible. It is like creme de la creme for helping kids who have trauma.
That's so fantastic. Okay. So before we started recording, I mentioned that I had a 2 pound baby. Teal's 2 pounds, 1 ounce, and that she had an emergency C-section. And I even said, oh, I can still sometimes just feel it right here in my heart and my throat. And
Yes.
I think sometimes, me personally, I think I poo poo traumas just because I'm running through my life.
Mm.
And what would you classify as a trauma that would qualify for something like that?
So trauma is an interesting word because we use it to describe multiple different things. So we use it to describe the event, right? And we use it to describe the effects of the event inside of the person. So what's important to note about trauma is that you can't with certainty say this event will cause this effect in every single person, right? And so an event that may seem small to someone might seem massive to somebody else. So what we're really looking for is any situation where you felt a deep sense of threat to your safety, to your belonging, or to your sense of dignity. This is my definition of trauma, by the way, but
I love it. I really like that definition. Say those three again.
anything that threatens your safety, your sense of belonging, or your sense of dignity. Okay. So you have an event like that and it threatens those things. So you feel that threat in your nervous system. And then it gets stuck and it doesn't clear, then we would say, okay, now we have what we would call PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And sometimes we have traumas and they are acutely traumatic, but then we have lots of spaces to process that trauma and time to process that trauma. And it gets out of our nervous system and we don't develop PTSD. And then other times we do. And a lot of it depends on how complex the trauma is, what our support network was like at the time that we had the trauma, right? I mean, there's sort of a social joking of the word trauma that also kind of adds into this where, it's like, oh, I just saw so-and-so with their shirt off. That was traumatic,
Oh,
right? Like,
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's not exactly traumatic.
no, nothing about seeing that person do that threatened your sense of safety, your sense of belonging, or your sense of dignity. You
Correct.
just felt grossed out or you felt disgust or whatever. That wasn't trauma.
Well, okay. So then let's go to how the trauma can be worked through using that type of a therapy approach.
So the base understanding we have about human beings and human development is that we are relationally developed. Okay. So there is no story of a baby being born out of the forest and crawling their way around and surviving. We cannot survive without relationships. So we're wired for this relational process. Children that have trauma, which staying in the NICU for a long time can be a trauma, right? It can be a trauma that, you are separated from birth parents early on or in infancy. It can be a trauma that there was something dangerous. You were abused physically, whatever the trauma is, the experience of feeling safe after that trauma is a relational experience. And what we now know about when children go through trauma is they aren't able to process it, right? There's no meaning connection. So they can't go, oh, well, it makes sense that I'm feeling kind of uneasy and overwhelmed because I was in that car accident and that semi hit the side of it, T-boned our car. All they have are the sensory details. And so the way they process the trauma is behaviorally. So they're acting out, they're not responding, they're not getting with the program, right? They're wetting their bed more often, they're et cetera, et cetera. And in an old school model, a behavioral model, the intervention from therapists would be like rewards and punishments. Like, oh, you peed in your bed again, or you raised your voice again, or you yelled a curse word at me. That is not okay. And so we're going to do something to try and convince you not to do that again by creating intentional suffering in you.
Mm-hmm.
Or you did something good and that we like that behavior, we're going to give you a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what TBRI and all attachment-based interventions say is, no, you're struggling and you need help learning how to regulate. And so my job is not to extinguish your behaviors, it's to understand them and to help you understand them so that you can begin to do something more effective to get your needs met.
Right. We've had Stephen Forth on who talks about the ABA, but from a very a much more gentle perspective, because
Relational.
I challenged him a little bit. I'm like, hello. And he said, it's very much has a horrible, horrible reputation. So as
Mhm.
you're talking, I love this because it's a completely different approach.
Mhm.
And that's one of my jobs here with the podcast, is to introduce people to different ways of approaching their children.
Mhm.
So I thank
Love
you
that.
for sharing this, because it's not my job to say this is right or this is wrong, but to simply say these are options for you. So cool. Okay. So as you were talking, I kind of freaked out in my body because I realized that my little 2 pound, 1 ouncer, she never got that understanding of, you're safe right here, right on mama, right now.
Mhm.
And, they had to, for her safety, put
Mhm.
her in the bag and put her on oxygen and keep her warm and ship her off to a beeping room with tons of lights and tons of people and all of that. And I sometimes step back. Well, now I'm kind of looking at this and going, man, she's really well adjusted,
Well,
considering.
I would challenge the notion that she didn't have relational safety.
Mm,
There were grown-ups that took her from your body and made sure she was warm and made sure she was safe and made sure there was pressure around her body that helped simulate the experience of the uterus. They made sure lights were low so that she wasn't overstimulated with light. Like, the NICU process is about simulating the relational experience of being inside of your body, inside of your womb. And so,
that makes me feel better.
yeah. And of course, she experienced some fear, or there was probably neurochemistry of fear, because she didn't have a typical experience of being born full term and being directly placed on your chest, and having her developmental process had some interruption and some trauma. But, and this is where we go back to, is it trauma? Is it not trauma? Right? There was care, there was presence. How often were you at that NICU making sure that she could hear your voice and speaking to her and putting your hand inside those little
Yes,
gloves and touching her? And
I never left.
so, I mean, she
Mhm.
did have a relational experience. She was not left in a forest,
Okay,
right?
thanks. Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
Mama
And
bear here didn't leave her in the forest. Good.
oh, no, you did not. You made sure, and those caregivers made sure that she was safe. And she is 6 years old. That is amazing.
Yeah, I know. She's a sweet miracle. I forget that she's a miracle. She's a miracle baby.
Yes.
Okay. So I know, okay, first of all, I love Attachment Nerd. That's your website. And you have a huge presence. Everyone, and we'll put all of your information in the show notes and we'll talk about it at the end. But that's actually how I found you, was on Instagram and all of your videos. And so everyone needs to go check those out right now, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever. But the Attachment Nerd is fantastic. But one of the things that you really talk about is attachment, our nervous system, how
Mhm.
secure our children feel within their own bodies, but then relationally with their parents. Will you just talk with me a little bit about how we as parents, whether we have a neurotypical child or an aneurotypical child,
Mhm.
how do we know that our child feels secure and their nervous system is self-regulating?
Yes. So the attachment system has multiple functions. The primary function of the attachment system is to create safety. So, as a species, survival is number one, always. So, the attachment system is most easily assessed in situations of distress. And distress is not, I'm angry at you because you turned off my screen and I'm screaming and kicking. That is frustration. That is overstimulation. It is not distress. Distress is, I am fearing for my survival. So how can you tell if your child is in a distress situation? Is really when they feel deeply scared. So that might be that you're walking through a park and a dog lunges and barks, or it might be at bedtime when the lights go out, right? What does your child do? And what we're looking for in terms of a secure pattern or strategy in attachment is a child who actively seeks their caregiver, clings, actively clings to the caregiver, and then soothes within a reasonable amount of time. Okay. And what I would say about non-neurotypical children is that there's a little bit of more of a stretch on the range of those things. So a child who cannot maybe move their own body to get to their caregiver may not seek contact physically, but maybe they seek eye contact. Or a nonverbal child, right, may not be able to scream for help, or maybe very disoriented because they aren't able to cognitively process distress, right? And their body can't make that quick decision. But there's a sense that some part of them is leaning or looking or seeking for the protection of their caregiver. And what that means is that they have internalized, when I am scared, somebody shows up to help me. That is their internalized narrative.
So how would that autistic child who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seek the eye contact or doesn't want the touch,
Mm-hmm.
how does that, you know what I mean?
How would it manifest?
Manifest. Thank you. I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes. How does that manifest within that child?
It'll be very unique to the child. So this is what's complicated about anytime we talk about child development is we want to study each child. How do they communicate? Do they flap? Is there an activating of a flapping that the caregiver knows is how they communicate? When you were talking about how your daughter doesn't communicate verbally as often, but you know what she's saying. Mm-hmm. So you're really studying an individual child and going, how do they express distress? And how do we know they're communicating to us? So an autistic child may not be looking at you, but maybe they're clicking, maybe they're flapping, maybe they're scooting near you or they're leaning in a direction. And the gift of secure attachment is really stemming from the caregiver's sensitivity. So their ability to attune, to accurately study and read the internal state of their child and the external cues of that internal state. And now every kid is different. So, I've got my 3 children and they all respond to distress differently.
Okay.
And they're all different in terms of their sensitivity, in terms of what distresses them. One of my children is textbook in terms of the strange situation. There is fear, there is distress, they run, they will climb up my body and soothe quickly. One of my other children runs, climbs up my body, but is highly sensitive. And so that soothing process, her nervous system gets jacked up in a different way. And so that process of soothing takes a little longer. She doesn't protest the soothing, and that's a very important thing because children that protest the soothing are struggling because their caregivers are not consistent enough in showing up. So they'll run to the caregiver, but then once they're with the caregiver, they push back or they push away or they reject a toy. There's some communication of, I don't know if you're going to stay. And so I'm going to keep being upset in order to try to keep you close to me. It's a proximity maintenance strategy.
Wow.
A child who is non-neurotypical and is in distress may not be able to seek in that active, overt way. But we would also see if they were actively moving away from the caregiver. Mm-hmm. And again, this is about the caregiver's attunement. So if a child gets overwhelmed by sensory input and they're in distress, you as a caregiver have to think, what is it that makes them feel safe? How do I help them feel safe? Potentially it is that you just come sit next to them and you gently use your words. Mama's here, mama's here, mama's here. Maybe audio is too sensitive for them, so you don't use any words. Right? You just come up next to them and maybe you bring a snack. Maybe there's some way that you help their brain process safety. But so you and your child have to figure out, what does it look like when they're scared? What does it look like when they're tender? How do I communicate safety and presence to them in a way that helps them feel soothed? That's how we're creating a secure attachment.
As you're chatting about all this, I'm like, well, it's what I call intuitive parenting, right? Yeah. It's being centered enough within yourself to be able to analyze a situation, whether that analysis is with your heart or your head or the energy and the auras or whatever. You have to be present enough to be present with them.
Yes.
And that can be really tricky as a stressed out, not supported enough mother or caregiver of a child that is perhaps hitting or perhaps exuding all of this stressful, it's like exacerbating your own stress.
Well, what I would say is, in particular with your particular audience, not all caregiving is alike, right? So, and in particular, the burden or the load of the caregiving. And so when you have a child who is in some way out of the range of typical developmentally, you're going to be giving far more energy to that developmental process than to someone who has a typically oriented child, which means you're more exhausted. And it's harder to stay centered. And there's a constantness to it. There's less of the rhythm. It's less like my child is scared. They run to me. I hug them. They soothe. I can let my guard down because there's not a lot of letting of the guard down in terms of your parenting can focus somewhere else for a little bit. No, you can't. You don't have that privilege. And so I think that's an interesting curiosity I would have for anyone who's listening to this is like, how are you surviving right now?
Yeah. I mean, but it's true. And those are real statements. Those are honest, real, messy statements. And that was a commitment that I made for this year's programs or these episodes is we're going to talk about a little bit more about the messiness and the reality of what it's like. I mean, I can't give my child a snack and walk away.
Well, yeah.
I can't.
She could die.
Well, she could. I mean, now the likelihood of her dying is very low, but there is still a simmering of listening and watching. There's never a moment really, even though the risk is low, there's never a moment where I am just completely checked out. And I know most parents are that way, but they're just from a neuro.
No, it's different. It's different. Yeah, it is. When we look at like the infant stage of development and what happens to the parent's brain, there is a constant scanning because of the level of helplessness of the child. But as the child develops into greater autonomy and capacity, the parent's brain starts shifting in how it works because now I don't have to be on guard 24/7. If your child is not able to develop out of that dependency, neither is your brain as the caregiver.
Okay, so then what do we do?
Community, community, community. Just as we are wired for attachment, we are wired for community. As many people who can witness that with you and bring, that solve of seeing you and seeing the way that you live and love, and also can give you ideas and maybe watch your child for an hour or two here or there so that you can literally just go lay flat in the grass somewhere and remember what it's like to not be constantly in fear of someone hurting your child or your child getting into an awful situation.
Being seen for me is probably more important than even someone saying or even handing my child off. It's someone saying to me, wow, that's hard.
Yes.
I mean, it's not even like, oh my God, you're such a great mom, because that really doesn't even help me. No. It's more of this recognition of your life is different. Mm-hmm. This is hard.
Yes. Which also relieves some of that guilt and blame that can come in of like, should this feel easier? Am I like, are these other people appear to be enjoying this process in a different way than I am? Is there something wrong with me? Yes. So being seen is a part of co-regulating. This is a part of our social nature. So when babies are small, we do a thing called mirroring, right? Where they go, and we look back at them and we're like, right? And that process is what creates identity over time. It's like, I exist. Mm-hmm. I know I exist because I see myself or my feelings or my state of mind echoed in the face of someone else in the way that they coo the way I coo when we mirror. And as grownups, as parents in unique situations, there is a need to sit with another parent who understands, maybe doesn't have the exact same lived experience, but is studying you and seeing you and can reflect back, yeah, you're doing something epic. This is not typical parenting because your child is not typical in their development. So this is atypical parent. I mean, we'll call it heroic parenting. You're going far beyond simply being a parent. You're on a hero's journey.
So interesting that you say that. It's even hard for me to hear it. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to hear that. I feel myself physically pushing from that, which is something for me to look at. Like, why can't I accept that? Yeah. But I recently heard a statistic that the stress level of a special needs parent is equivalent to a combat soldier.
That is a beautiful, honoring, truth-telling statistic.
It just gave me like a pause to say, Yeah. Whew. This is tricky. So
Yes.
everyone who's listening, I just really hope that you know, like, hey, you're being heard right now. You're like, we are, even if we can't connect with your face right now, we are acknowledging you and we are seeing you. And we know that this is not easy.
Yes.
So that kind of makes me shift and pivot a little bit from our child to us.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we as this community figure out ways to self-care is such an overused word, but it is true. How do I fill myself up? How do I give my nervous system a moment to regulate?
Yes.
What are some tips and tricks that you have for the neurological systems that we have?
Well, in specific for this community, I want to give you my most realistic tip, which is please don't look for rest to come in large bulk quantities.
Yes,
It
I'm
won't.
not laughing, but it's so true.
I mean, maybe every once in a season there will be some incredible refuge of a few hours or maybe a few days, but most likely what you're going to have are minutes and moments. And so there's a big trend right now where people are microdosing medications as sort of a concept. And I think it's an interesting idea. It needs more research, but I assume that it probably in the long run will be pretty valid as a treatment form. And you can microdose rest. You can go to the bathroom and in those 3 minutes, take some super deep breaths
Mm-hmm.
and allow your body to come just for 1 minute, go, in this moment, your only job is to release the pee, release the poo, release the stress,
Mm-hmm.
release. Offering that little nurture of acknowledging your humanity and your body's experience and the stress that you're holding.
Mm-hmm.
You can be sitting in a room monitoring something, making sure that everything's safe, and notice the clenching in your hands and just go, okay, I'm going to release my hands. I'm going to spread my feet out wide. I'm going to imagine that my body is kind of heavy and jelly-like, and I'm still alert.
Mm-hmm.
Eyes, I'm seeing what I need to see, or I'm listening in the ways I need to listen, but I'm going to give my body a break from having to be on high alert in terms of the tension my body's holding. Like
Yeah.
this isn't a tense moment. It's tense because I'm thinking about potentially scary things, but I don't have to be tense because I'm not in the presence of the actual tiger at the moment, right?
Right. Well, and that's a very good reminder from, and I do this a lot. Like, okay, where am I holding this right now?
Mm-hmm.
Where within my body am I holding this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we all hold it differently.
Yes.
Sometimes it's our jaws, sometimes it's our neck, sometimes it's our diaphragm. Like we're not releasing and breathing. I did hear we need to make sure that we exhale longer than we inhale.
Oh, interesting.
Because
Okay.
Okay, right now I can hear the fire alarm going off, and I think that is a stress indicator. No, tell me about this. Like, what does this mean?
Well, here's what it makes me think of. So when we are feeling safe, okay, and I don't mean when we are safe, I mean when we are feeling safe. That is like, I can think clearly. There's no alarm in the background, right? I am able to focus and control. When there is a sense of threat, even if we're safe, but there's a sense of threat, it shifts the way we focus. So right now I'm talking with you, but I can hear a fire alarm going off behind me, right? And so I'm aware of you, but there's a part of my body that is unsettled. Even though I already have the data that we are not currently having a fire in my building, that it was popcorn that burnt, and that the fire department said, everybody go back to your offices, you're fine. I know I'm safe, but I'm sitting with this alarm going off and it's affecting my awareness. So when you are parenting a developmentally unique child, you always have an alarm going off.
Yes.
That's it. Like, and there is no like, okay, now someone's going to turn off the alarm. The alarm doesn't turn off when they go to daycare because you're like, I know the statistics and how often disabled kids are sexually abused, right?
Yeah.
Is disabled?
You know what? It's very controversial. It's fine. The words that people use, I'm fine with it, whether it's disabled or challenged or
Yeah.
it's all good. We have acceptance here, and so you're all good.
Yeah.
I
Well,
appreciate you acknowledging that because a
honor.
lot of people don't.
Yeah. I have a child who I would describe as non-neurotypical, but she does in most ways follow the developmental norms. And so I have not, in the same way that you and your community, sat in the complexity of what it feels like to hear my child labeled in a certain way, because she doesn't get labeled by other people. Right. So anyway,
she probably does. She probably gets labeled as sensitive.
Yeah.
She's actually just so sensitive. And you're like, yes. Oh, but can we honor that too?
Yes. And intense. She's intense.
Yeah. Well, you're intense.
I was just going to say, it's not the apple fall far from the tree. That's right.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so I love that. The metaphor of the alarm, though, is really powerful because it is true. I am always thinking of what's going on. Am I like every time my phone beeps, even during a podcast recording, yes. I look down. Like, is it the school? Is it the school? Is it the school? Yeah. So yeah.
Is Teal okay? Has something happened? Yeah. Do I need to go in and function as an interpreter for her in a way, right? And again, all parents have this to some degree. And sometimes in typical parenting, there's an alarm bell going off in the background, of course, but it is not all the time.
Right.
There is just a different level of responsibility on you as a caregiver of a child who has special needs, period.
Yep. Deep breath, everyone. Period. And deep breath and long exhale. Because I love how much you're just acknowledging it. There's so many people that just give solutions, but don't really honor that alarm is going constantly. I love that metaphor. It's fantastic. The universe completely dropped that alarm in there for all of us to just consistently hear it. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Actually, we're keeping it in the recording, the whole bit of it. So let's transition to looking at ways that we as parents can positively influence that relationship that we have with our child. It's so valuable. I mean, I know that I'm very lucky that my Teal is exceptionally sensitive. I mean, she looked at me in the airplane on Monday morning and just gave me this pause and this message. And she visually just said, I adore you. Oh. And I was like, oh my God, I love you, Teal. Like, I'm so lucky. One, that I slowed down and caught it, right? So I do give myself some props for that. And it's hard sometimes to slow down and catch those messages. But what can parents do? Let's say they have a stimming autist who runs, or they have a non-physically able child to caress and touch and hug and pull in towards them. Like, what can parents do to positively influence that neurological connection and then also just the overall connection?
The best metaphor I have for this is around like getting in sync. Okay, so the human experience of connection is that we use language like we're vibing with someone, right? There's this kind of sense of I am in a particular state, a particular body state, and I'm going to recognize and notice the body state my child is in, and I'm going to do what I can to create synchronicity. And sometimes that synchronicity is helping them come into more of a calm body state like my body's in, and sometimes it's joining the excitement of their body state. So if you have a child who flaps in when they're excited, and they get excited about purple, you're going to create as much purple in their environment as you can. And you're going to join them emphatically, authentically in expressing your delight in their delight. You're so excited. Is it purple? Mm-hmm. And offering delight when they come into the room in whatever way they best receive it. So for some kids, you being loud might not create delight for them. If you're like, hi, buddy, their ears are like, no, they've got audio processing, please stop, right? So the delight might be more visual, where you're just like,
yes,
right? Or that might be overwhelming to them because potentially they're overwhelmed by touch, right? And so the delight is that, you come in the room and you go,
okay, so no one can see you. So the first thing that you did in that pause was to like just show this huge delight without any verbal. So your whole body lit up, you got really big, and it was amazing. And then the second pause was you saying, just showing a big smile with your fingers, like just being calm with your body, but just visually smiling. Trying to make sure.
Draw heart on your chest with your fingers.
Yeah.
If eye contact isn't the thing, if it's like, some little pinky hook that you do, that you communicate that, you know, you're reading your specific child. What is it that they find soothing, regulating, and connecting? And where do they ignite delight? And how can you participate in that and emphasize that and join them in that? And then when they are in places of tenderness, finding ways to communicate that you are receiving their feelings and holding them with them, right? You're really upset. You're really sad. And again, verbal, nonverbal, like there's different ways to do this. A child who's not yet verbal, you don't even have to say the words. You can just go, oh, right? They're hearing that you're receiving their groans, their suffering, and that you're holding it with them. You're not freaking out. You're not leaving. You're not punishing them. So as much as you can, you're creating synchronicity. Here's the good news. According to the research of Ed Tronick, and we have some longitudinal studies on this, a child has a secure attachment with an adult when they experience that type of synchronicity 30% of the time. Not that much.
No, I was like, that's not a lot, Eli.
That's right. And there's a reason for that. You know, as a human species, we couldn't have survived. We have to gather food. We have to protect ourselves. We have, you know, we're trying to innovate healthcare. We're trying to do all these things. We cannot be in sync with our children 24/7. So take that pressure off yourself. I do a lot of zoning. I mean, people will ask me like, how are you doing all this social media stuff? Like, how are you doing it? I'm like, well, I'm like sitting on a couch and my kids are watching, you know, Puff and Rock. And I'm like hitting my head against the wall watching that. And so like, I'm responding to comments on social media.
Right.
And we're not in sync in that moment. We're not having that attuned connection. I'm there. I'm present. They feel my presence. They like that I'm there. I like that they're there. But that's okay. That time isn't harmful to them that we aren't deeply connected. We're all just resting. And I'm listening to the cues right now. If I'm sitting on the couch and I'm on my phone and one of my children's like, mom, stop working, right? And they're starting to get agitated and distressed. Well, then that is problematic if I'm continuing to stay on my phone and I'm not going to put my phone down and give them eye contact. What do you need, pal?
You know, that's actually something I try to do verbally with Teal, because I think she only sees a device as a fun video distractor, but we use our devices for work.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
And so I'm very cognizant that when I'm actually doing something that is work-based, I will tell her, Teal, right now I'm sitting next to you, but your mama is doing work.
Fabulous.
I'm doing work right now. And then there are times when I'm just scrolling on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, nope, got to put that phone down, because it is important for me to have that connection, whether it's just holding her hand. You know, I was in the airplane with her and she was watching a video because, hello, we got an international flight, an airplane, and she's watching a video. And I just reached down and held her hand while I was watching my own video. And so it's something that we can all create connection in very simple ways, even when we're somewhat multitasking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that.
So much fun. Thank you very, very much for having this conversation with me.
I loved having this conversation with you. And I love your energy and how excited you are about spreading positivity and helping people be connected and advocating and having authentic conversations. So
thank you. Well, I think we'll have you back. I think it would be really fun. And maybe we'll do a live with you and be like, okay, let's just ask Eli questions. So we're shifting. I have one final question for you, but we're shifting it. So I used to ask one question, but since it's the new year, I'm asking a new one. Okay. All right. So tell me one positive experience that you have had with a child with special needs.
I've had so many. I have to think of which one I want to share. I had the opportunity almost a decade ago to travel with a group of adoptees who had been adopted out of China, and they were returning to China as a part of kind of their process, and went to do some volunteering in the orphanages there, not so much for the orphanage's purpose, but for their own processing, to go kind of back to these spaces and understand their beginnings that they don't have visual memory and stuff. Anyway, but so I had this opportunity to be with a bunch of kids. And at the time I went to China, most of the children in orphan care special needs children, because the one child rule had kind of been loosened. And so it was a different orphanage setting than it had been when these traveling adoptees had been in the orphanage. And there was this one particular child who, when we got there, the narrative around this child was like, she's so difficult. And I think that motivated me. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a challenge. Let's see if I can create some connection with this child.
Yeah.
But I remember, initially kind of creating that trust with her and slowly coming near her and playing with her. And then by the end of the week, like the experience of her trusting me and allowing me to like sit right next to her or hold her. And I don't know, there is something incredibly sacred about when a child allows trust with you. Yeah. So I mean, I will always think of her. She ended up being adopted out of that orphanage, and I followed her for a long time. And I still kind of just like, I have a little vibe around. Oh. Yeah. Just this little tiny little thing who was probably 3 years old, but felt, 18 months maybe.
Right. Oh, I love that. It's a good reminder for all of us that any label that you get, whether it's difficult or Downs or sensitive or CP or autistic, all labels are simply labels, and we can work through those and still find the beauty.
I always say, like, you get to pick which labels which stickers you want to keep on and which ones you want to take off. And sometimes labels are extremely helpful because they're organizing and they help us organize our experiences or the experiences of other people around us. But sometimes they feel limiting, and then you just rip them off. Like, that's not good for me,
Just rip off that sticker. I like it. I ripped off some definitely that I was raised with. Woo! I mean, you can imagine this little person right here was labeled a lot with her energy.
What a special little person you must have been.
Oh, I was a handful in a good way. I feel really bad for my parents, but they're so lucky to have me.
Both can be true. Love that.
Thank you so very much for joining us, Eli. It's been such a pleasure, and you have just added so much value to this dialogue today. So thank you. Thank you. Make sure that people check out your website, which is attachmentnerd.com, which I love. And you also have the Nerd Herd, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that before we end, because it is this awesome opportunity for people to connect and get lots of resources.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, I started creating more in-depth resources for parents after doing my social media stuff, because you just can't do the in-depth work. And I had a lot of families being like, okay, but how do we do this? Okay, but I messed this up early on. How do I change it now? And so I created some, I call them guides as opposed to classes, because who has time for classes? I don't. So I kept them short and digestible and put them into kind of like little snippets so that you can do some learning around how to create this secure relationship with your kids, how to manage your relationship with your partner, which is a big part of your kids feeling secure in your home, right? How can you prevent sexual abuse? So there's a whole free sexual abuse prevention guide on my website. So if you go in, there's like a basic membership and you can sign up for that, and then you get access to that. But then I have like a few different options for subscribing to all of the other content, which includes all of my other videos organized by topic. So instead of going to my Instagram page and trying to scroll, you can just go in there and you can access all of that in an organized way. And I'm working on building up a community of what I would call like-hearted parents that are all deeply invested in connection with their children. So there is a village section, and you can participate in that. You can share, you can ask questions, and I'm doing more answering of bigger questions in those spaces because I don't have the time to do that on social media. And then I'm doing a monthly live virtual. So if nothing else, you get a monthly live virtual class where you get to hear me talk about a topic related to connection and raising children. And then we do a Q&A and all connect and together. And so would love for you to come join the Nerd Herd.
Like-hearted. I love it. Those nerds are lucky to have you, as we all are.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very, very much again, Eli. We will definitely be in touch. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found one or two meaningful nuggets of information to make your day better. If you think there's value in what we do, please take a moment to tell another friend, family member, or a caregiver. We'd love to hear from you at forourspecialkids@gmail.com. You can send in a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or if you'd like us to highlight a certain person, please send that information to us. It makes our show so much better and so much more valuable for you. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is For Our Special Kids. And finally, remember to witness the wonder and the wisdom within yourself and others. Until next time.